All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to June 17th, 2023, Victoria Electric Vehicle Association Zoom event. Today we've got two great presenters here from our Crown Corporation, BC Hydro. So it's going to be a really good event, as they all are. They're getting better and better. Jim and I are both in agreement on that. And what I'd like to do is acknowledge that we've got Jim, our producer here, our Leo Bloom, as it is, and we also have Victoria here. She's our maven of the social medias and tech wizard for our online presence. Great to have them here supporting as well. A little bit of housekeeping. Just a reminder, Victoria Electric Vehicle Association, we are an electric vehicle advocate organization, non-profit. We run on volunteer hours, and so any donations you have are greatly appreciated. You can also buy our swag at our website. Great t-shirts, car decals on the inside of the car, and these ever popular and now classic historical timepieces of our COVID masks that say no emissions on them. So yeah, all those things. We'd also like you to go to our YouTube site, Victoria EV Association, as you see behind me. Just printed like that. Click on as a subscriber and you'll be up to date with both these events that we do, plus video essays that we're going to be putting more up all the time. Now, today, we're going to be doing two presentations. We're going to have the microphones off during the presentation. Please put your questions down into the chat. And then once both presenters have come through and finished their discussion, we'll then go to the chat and take those questions. So without further ado, we're going to start off with Mike Wenslaff, BC Hydro, and he is the more customer late duty vehicle facing person at BC Hydro who looks after all of our EV needs. Mike, take it away.
Thank you very much, Glenn, and thanks Victoria EV Association for having us, for having Jason and I. So we have about 20-25 minutes of materials that we'll go through. I think we're going to do a break after that, and then we have plenty of time for a Q&A, and Jason and I can answer your questions. We're going to touch on, at a high level, BC Hydro's role and stock forecasts and the grid side of things briefly. Then we're going to go into some of the high level activities happening in BC and actually happening for many, many years around EV awareness, education, residential charging. I'll talk about some of those things. We're then going to dive into some public charging. We've recently put out, had a public workshop, that regulatory oriented workshop a couple weeks ago. So I'll share some materials from that. And then Jason is going to get into fleet side and medium and heavy duty. We'll have a break and then some QA time. So that's our agenda. Feel free to put comments, questions in the chat, and we'll catch up to those at the end, and we'll set aside plenty of time to cover those off. So let's get rolling here. So at a high level, the BC Hydro's role as a primary energy supplier in BC is to really be the fuel supplier of our electric transportation future. So we're here to help the provincial mandate of the ZEV sales target, ensure we have the electricity and to charge all these vehicles and wherever they're charging, at home or workplace or public, to build that EV awareness to help hit our ZEV goals in BC, which is 100% EV sales by 2035 on the passenger side. And then just all the standard utility things of the helping with new connections and service upgrades, basically the whole path of electrification, which we're all embarking on in BC, both on the transportation side as well as the built environment side as well. And then lastly, BC Hydro has some prescribed undertakings that we've been asked to undertake by the province, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So just a quick level set. There's been some recent news about BC Hydro's integrated resource plan. This is a slide from a couple months ago. There's been some recent updates, recent announcements, but basically BC Hydro, on a regular basis, we are always revising and using data to inform our forecasts. We've been considering EV forecasts in our planning for over a decade, and so this doesn't change. This is something continuous, and so the news that was announced earlier this week is that things are moving a bit faster, so we're going to be looking at acquiring some additional power later on in the decade, because the electrification is nicely moving ahead and everybody's getting on board. So that's good news for everybody. So this is something we have teams that do on a regular basis to look at load, not just at a system level, but substation, distribution level. There's lots of different nuances to that. So something we're doing on an ongoing basis. And then from an EV stock standpoint, we are amongst the highest EV sales in North America. So we're doing great in BC here with over 20% EV sales. There's been a bit of a lull in the growth over the last year and a half due to just lack of supply, but it seems like that lull will start easing up pretty soon. And these different forecast numbers show that there's some variability to that. And again, it's something that just gets refreshed on a regular basis based on the latest data and where the trends are at. But again, we're planning for it, and over the next decade, it's going to be massive in BC as we electrify transportation. And then I'll just touch on briefly, and before we started this call, that the team was actually touching on fully charged. But before I get into some of the topics, like at a very high level, awareness building is, and what Victoria EV Association is doing is just so important. That gets broad awareness, and something that a lot of people in BC have been doing for a decade now, is why we've been so successful in BC in EV adoption. So education and helping people understand why all the benefits of going electric is why we're moving forward collectively in BC. So, and BC Hydro has been taking part in this for a decade of just pushing information, pushing content, and marketing, and facilitating programs and education, and working with the province on that, and working with organizations such as yourselves on that. So it's a collective effort. And this year I'll put a plug for Fully Charged, which will be one of the largest electrification events in Canada. So we're doing that here in Vancouver, and anybody's welcome to attend. It'll be very exciting. So on the home charging front, we know that 3/4 of people with EVs charge at home. It's the most convenient. It's the main culture shift of moving to EVs, is waking up in the morning and going to your car and it's full and ready to go. And it's a wonderful experience to have that control and of fueling at home. So ongoing is just education, removing barriers, make it easier for people to charge at home. On the single family side is a bit easier, whether you just charge with a regular receptacle and level 1, or you want to put in level 2 and charge a bit faster. BC Hydro has been working with the province for many years to offer incentives and rebates around that. It is temporarily unavailable, that incentive, just as of this week, due to the popularity of it. But at some point it'll come back. And then on the multi-unit residential side, again, that's the big area of opportunity, because it's trickier for putting in charging in multi-unit residential buildings with multiple stakeholders, sometimes older buildings and power constraints. So the program that we've been offering with the province has been very successful of allowing at least stratas that first step of doing that assessment and getting a rebate for that assessment is such a critical step to understand what the options are. So that's been very successful, and a lot of people have been leveraging those incentives. There's also the federal and provincial vehicle incentive, which has been hugely successful. So as in the last year, the provincial one has switched to an income tested approach given its success. And then the latest thing around charging at home is BC Hydro has a filing in with the BC Utilities Commission around an optional whole home time use. And so this is going through the process now, and there's ability for people to take part in that regulatory process and provide their input. So that's there's many tools in the toolbox that are moving ahead on the residential charging front. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So these materials I cut down. We did a public workshop a couple of weeks ago with our regulatory team on our public charging, talking about stats and customer input and 10-year deployment plan at our proposed rates. So these materials are public. You can take a look at the full deck. It's on bchydro.com. Search for regulatory workshops. That was a 4-hour session. So I'm cutting that 4 hours down into about 10 minutes of slides here. So I'm not going to cover it all, but it's a quick flyby. And so just diving into that. So in BC, for public charging, we're doing quite well. As you can see, Tesla is the biggest party putting in fast charging in BC. And BC Hydro, you can see there in dark blue. So there's lots of entities putting in charging. We're doing really well in BC. Mostly BC and Quebec and Canada are at the forefront of the port to vehicle ratio in terms of public charging. So, but there's always a lot more to do to remove barriers to charging, both in an urban environment and in a longer term longer distance travel. So for BC Hydro, we have, I think we're at close to 150 ports now in the last, since the stat was made out of March 31st, but we continue to put public infrastructure out there for the people of BC that's designed as an essential service and filling in the gaps. So that's really BC Hydro's role, is to fill in that gap and provide a public service for the people of BC. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but we'll continue to move north, and we'll continue to fill gaps in what we're doing. But this is something we've been honing and strengthening and growing in the last couple of years. So in terms of what BC Hydro has been doing of the public charging we've been putting in place, is to really just put forward that strong backbone of reliability, geographic coverage, safety, accessibility, try to raise the bar. And we've seen other entities copy some of the things we've been doing as well, which we encourage. We want to see the whole ecosystem raise the bar of public charging. We're one of the first to put in pull-through charging sites. So we have a number of those now in place across BC, where if you have a electric pickup truck and you're pulling a trailer, well, you don't have to do a pull-in and try to back up your trailer. So we're doing that. And it's starting to increase the power levels of what we're deploying. So here's just a selection of some of the sites in the last 2 quarters or so of what's been expansions and new sites. So the pace is starting to increase now. We've upped our resources, and the pace is starting to move faster and faster. I'm just going to touch on some custom research now before I get into our longer term deployment plans. So we have some interesting research for context setting. And so this research was from some general population research. And this is to British Columbians, and it came from a research firm that didn't identify their client as BC Hydro. So it's very general, but better public EV infrastructure will encourage more people to buy EVs. I'm sure most people here think that's probably a no-brainer, but it's important to have this data which helps support investment. So that's good to see, is that help reduce barriers, help increase confidence, will increase more adoption. The second one of these insights that came from this general population research is who should be putting in public charging in BC. And so this is very interesting to us as a utility that we're the top of when you combine all the three choices of who should be putting in public EV infrastructure. You could surmise that it's probably the perspective of public service for public good perspective. But there's other entities, in here as well, provincial ministries and automotive manufacturers, and so Tesla would be a good example, or the key example of putting in public EV infrastructure. So this was an interesting insight, and it's good for people to see and of what British Columbians think. And then getting into, again, this is from the general population survey, like people that may or may not have an EV of entities putting in charging, what should be their priorities. So affordability and reliability and easy to use are the top, as you can see here. So that's interesting as we move from early majority, or our early adopters to early majority, the ease, the consistency, all those things are important to increase the adoption. So I'm just going to dive into some survey research that was from our own EV network members, that were from people who register with BC Hydro that generally have an electric vehicle, and what they think. So as a context of this group of people, about 3/4 charge at home, and about a quarter of them use public charging. So this is the sample size this research came from. But we asked, what are the suggested priorities for BC Hydro? And some of you might have received the survey. So shorter charging times, higher power. So really what that means is more chargers per site, higher power is kind of those top two items. But then amenities and washrooms and things like that are next in the list. So that's something that we've been seeing consistently in the last couple of years in our research, and we've adjusted our plans and how we do things using this customer research. We also asked about pricing options, and some of this research went into what I'll talk to shortly around what we're looking at in terms of rates. But kilowatt hour rates has been the top item the last couple of years, but also the idea of nudging people to move along and not leave their vehicle there to block this public infrastructure. So finding ways to do that with things like idle fees, and then differentiating power levels and a couple other elements there that kind of will help fund this infrastructure and allocate some of the cost to individuals, such as if they want to use a credit card tab reader, there is a cost to do that. So there's some elements there as well that we need to think about. So at a high level, some of this research, faster charging, but still a wide range. So there's still people want, in a community context or an overnight context, or in a multi-unit residential area, that level 2 on a curbside overnight, they're still very relevant, but right up to 100, 200 kilowatts for long distance travel. So it's not just saying, okay, we want faster charging, but it's the right charging at the right time, the right place. It's really based on what is the dwell time you want. If you're on a road trip, you want your dwell time is about the time to go to the bathroom in a coffee shop, at a rest stop. Whereas you're going for dinner, your dwell time is 2 hours. So aligning the different types of charging with what you're doing is really what that research shows. But the interesting secondary part to that is in urban areas, the willingness to wait, especially for a quick fast charge, keeps going down. So patience is reducing. So that's as we move to an early majority on population, it's interesting to see that. So there might be still people in that gas station mindset for us to think about. Daytime is when most people use public charging. So that's interesting for BC Hydro from a system perspective, and something for us to think about. And then there is some increased willingness to pay that has shown up in the research. So people are willing to pay a little bit more, but they expect a certain service and reliability experience from that. So this is some benchmarking we did actually with asking our email list of, if you compare the different entities across a whole bunch of different factors, Tesla is at the top, but BC Hydro is the second in terms of the benchmark scoring of, and you can see the sample size below there of what the people were asked which of these networks they've used and what did they think. So it's just good information for everybody to just be open and where we're at as a collective ecosystem to make the experience better for everybody. So I'm just going to jump into what we're at now for public charging deployment plan from a BC Hydro perspective. So our current official plan right now, subject to change as part of the regulatory process, is about 450 DC ports by end of 2025 is what's currently funded. And it really has two tracks: geographic coverage, which is get right up to the Yukon border, and then urban densification, which is filling the gaps in urban areas. We're also doing a pilot project with level 2 ports, which is really trying a bunch of different new things for community charging. We have some equipment that we're designing with a vendor that has embedded metrology that is Measurement Canada compliant. And we're going to be putting chargers on wood distribution poles that are about 12 feet up with drop down cables and a bunch of things we're trying out to see other options, back to the research, which is the right charging at the right place at the right time for what people need. So that is underway, and those will be deployed in early 2024. Lots of things around the technology platform to support future kilowatt hour rates, but also just improving physical sites, accessibility, lighting, and we're putting in higher power units now. I just saw our team, we just got a big order of 180 kilowatt dual vehicle charging stations in just in the last month or so, and so those will get kind of prepped up for deployment starting this fall. So that's exciting to see the power levels go up and that flexibility of dynamic power share charging stations. And then we're also starting to do larger sites. So we have some 4-port, 6-port, 8-port, and I think the team mentioned to me that we're pretty close to lining up a 10 DC port site. So we're getting bigger in terms of what we're deploying, especially in urban areas. So the serving the demand is what we're trying to do, and fill in the gaps. So this year, I don't have the full list of sites, but moving up toward the Yukon border, Tumbler Ridge comes to mind, Haida Gwaii. Those are some examples, but a variety of different sites in all areas of the province to check off both the geographic coverage path as well as the urban densification. And that's on the right side is a rendering of a 8-port site. So I think we're doing one in Surrey as our first 8-port site. So then when we look forward 10 years, and we have a draft 10-year deployment plan that we've presented publicly a couple weeks ago, and that will a final draft will go in the rate application. But really our assumptions are to help accelerate the EV adoption is to build ahead of the demand, to build confidence. And then the dial back part is really we're assuming other public charging entities will really be in place in the early 2030s. But we'll have to keep adjusting as we go. We've got to see what happens. And nobody has a crystal ball. We're going to go to a higher percentage of urban sites, given the number of demand, the population, but we're still committed to making sure that geographic coverage across BC happens. This plan is a passenger vehicle focus. Jason will talk about medium heavy duty and touch on that. There's another phase of strategy work that's happening to think about medium heavy duty charging. So that is not in this current one, because some more work on that is required. As I mentioned, we're assuming quite a varied ecosystem of entities. So what BC Hydro is doing is just amongst that ecosystem will be that essential service, public service piece amongst that ecosystem. This updated deployment plan means we're going to have to start accelerating for our plans starting as early as next year to move on a different trajectory. And then it's something that will just have to be adjusted on a regular basis. Nobody has a crystal ball. And so using the data and seeing what the citizens of BC are doing in terms of EV adoption and their needs, and we'll adjust as we go. So what this means is somewhere in the realm of a 2,000 DC port deployment that BC Hydro is considering, and this is going to be open for further consultation. And of that is about 75% urban. And then our reference plan has about 1,200 level 2 ports at this time. And again, that will be open for further input and some more research and study on what people of BC want in terms of community charging, in terms of curbside and local area charging, given that level 2 is something new to BC Hydro's mandate just in the last month. So I think there's going to be some more consultation to get some input on where we should go on the level 2 front, given our new prescribed undertaking to move forward at that power level as well. And the right side is in the draft deployment plan, quite a variety of levels of power, but we're over the course of the plan, there's going to be higher level in there as well. And as I mentioned, this excludes the medium heavy duty charging. So megawatt is not in here because that some further strategic work needs to happen on that medium heavy duty front to get a good plan around that. So I'm just going to switch gears to, okay, well, here's BC Hydro's high level plan. How is this going to be turned into rates and funded? And so we are moving into the direction of a cost recovery approach where this is funded predominantly through rates on a 10-year levelized basis. So as part of this, and as you saw in the customer feedback, kilowatt hour rates is going to be a key to this of what our customers want. So we are actually there's a number of tracks that are underway, and so we're going to work towards this and hope for launching kilowatt hour rates early 2024. But we have to get through all these prerequisites. So some Measurement Canada things, there's hardware tracks, there's technology tracks, and getting a newer rate approved. So a number of these tracks will all be moving through the course of this calendar year. So they're all underway, and we hope to have all these prerequisites out of the way so we can launch kilowatt hour rates. And there's a bunch of other entities that are on the same track in Canada. Nobody's had public charging kilowatt hour rates in Canada, other than a couple pilots here and there. So there's going to be a major change for people in Canada to experience a shift in how public charging is billed, but it'll be volumetric based on the electrons you receive. And so just a couple comments that from our regulatory team of like ahead of mentioning the proposed rates is that there's a couple elements that we've incorporated that the BC Utilities Commission has asked us to incorporate. So these are those elements of cost of service, level playing field, some flexibility and efficiency in how this is approached. So these are some of the things that are going into how we're looking at this rate application, rate filing, and have some long-term longevity to what we're doing. And some of the key assumptions is the continued EV adoption, which I think everybody in this group is fully supportive of and can see. But we also need some of the government capital funding to make all the numbers work, and utilization is so critical to make the numbers work. And that balance of low utilization areas actually don't have enough revenue to cover their costs. So you got to figure out how to balance all this stuff out. And then moving from a per minute to per kilowatt hour based approach has some nuances to it. So our rates proposals have some of these assumptions about 800,000 EVs in 10 years. That deployment plan that I showed you these about 3/4 urban stations. But then there's a range of urban to non-urban utilization rates in there, and then government funding may not last forever. So there's some elements there that all these are assumptions, and nobody has a crystal ball exactly how this will go. So we have to move forward based on the best information we have available at the time. And so these are the proposed rates. And so the idea is to move to more of granular power level buckets and a framework where we can do both per minute rates and have those approved at the same time of kilowatt hour rates. So there can be a transition period where potentially some sites, if the hardware the measurement isn't accurate enough, they might have to stay on per minute rates for the time being. So there's this hybrid approach allows for a certain charger, a certain site to be in a per minute construct or per kilowatt hour construct as we make this transition. And we're prepping for higher power rates. And so this is what was presented a couple weeks ago, and input has been received, and I'm pretty sure there'll be some tweaks to this before the final application, but this is what was presented a couple weeks ago. And then I'll just make one comment on that there will be a bit of a change to how people experience their bill and their receipt when moving from a time-based rate to a kilowatt-hour based rate. And so what happens is that if you have a vehicle that has quite a steep curve in terms of the power draw, you're paying more in a per minute construct at the latter end of your session in a per minute approach versus a per kilowatt hour approach. You're paying for the electrons there. We are looking at finding a way to balance out people not staying at 95% state of charge and basically doing a level 2 trickle charge on a 100 kilowatt unit, because that's not the best use of that infrastructure. So there is an extended stay fee concept that we've put out for input, part of the workshop process. So it's looking like there'll be some element of an extended stay concept in there, but again, it'll be something we'll have to monitor and see how the behavior impacts things. But to date, there is very few entities that have done an extended stay fee that starts before 100% state of charge. Usually it's more of an idle fee approach, but it's also related to the supply and demand of charging. So if there's a site that has 20 chargers and the supply is sufficient, then that's less of an element you need to add in. So it's a balance of building enough infrastructure to meet the demand, and then balancing that with the fee structure to encourage people to move on. So the rate application process is something that people here can get involved in through the organization, and we look forward to your further feedback as that progresses.
Just the introduction for Jason there. Jason Scottati from BC Hydro again, and he is on the fleet enablement side of things. So yeah, very interested to hear what you have to say as well, Jason.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to the team today. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our fleet program offers and also what we're seeing on the horizon in terms of fleet electrification opportunities and where this market is going. A bit of background in my role. So started at BC Hydro in 2019, specifically to work on fleet electrification programs. Spent a lot of time developing a program offer with customer engagement and consultation that led us to launch our first fleet electrification program offer about a year ago, actually, June 2022. And also in my role as a key account manager, I work with a large number of the EV infrastructure customers in BC as well that deploy their own networks, like Tesla, like Electrify Canada, Parkland, Chevron, Shell, all the larger players that help supplement the fast charging network in the province too. So I'm going to go over a little bit of fleet electrification trends, what we're seeing in the market, specifically what I learned at the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo and Conference that was about a month ago that I had the good fortune of attending. And then I'll talk about our fleet program offer, mostly to help provide some customer context and what we're seeing from that space and where customers are going and which segments are looking promising in BC. And then I thought just for a quick overview, I'd talk about our fleet electrification rates. We do have specific demand relief rates for fleet electrification projects. And so those can be pretty attractive for some customers that have that level of charging and demand on their utility rate. So yeah, a bit of background. Like I mentioned, I was able to go to the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo and Conference. It was the first time I was there. It was in the beginning of May in Anaheim. And here in BC, we're not the same market as California. We're lagging behind in terms of deployment here with respect to commercial zero emission vehicle trucks. California is definitely the leader in that space. And so, we are seeing some uptake here in the market growth as well. But it was quite eye-opening going to this conference and expo. The entire Anaheim Convention Center was full of zero emission vehicle trucking technologies and vehicles. Football fields full of them. And so it was really a great feeling to go to this conference and to see how much movement we're seeing in the commercial vehicle space as well, given what we're seeing in the passenger vehicle growth in BC. Really, I could say pretty much every major truck manufacturer is investing heavily in zero emission vehicle technologies. If they're focused on battery electric vehicles, some of them are also doing hydrogen fuel cell. By and large, we saw a lot of BEV though. That seems to be the primary focus, and I'll get into that in the next slide a little bit as well. So everybody, Kenworth, Peterbilt, Freightliner, Daimler is part of Freightliner. Lion Electric there, the Canadian company, a whole bunch of other players. And we're seeing a lot of other interesting new startups in this space as well. And in some cases, those new startups are partnerships with existing large OEMs like Daimler and Freightliner, who have now a side partner called Rizon that's looking at a Class 6 box truck configuration for market deployment. Some of the key things out of the conference were definitely battery technology was a big part of the discussion, very much advancing rapidly, huge amount of focus on improving kilowatt hours per density, the efficiencies of battery technology. As one of the utilities in there, one of the overarching themes, if I'm going to be completely honest, was infrastructure projects are now becoming the barrier. So a year ago, it was really about vehicle availability, having the challenges to get those vehicles. Production quantities were pretty limited. Market deployments were pretty limited. A lot of the manufacturers were just getting their production cycles up and running. That has now shifted in California and some parts of the major markets in the US to really being about infrastructure readiness. And so, we did have a utility only session on one of the breakfast conferences, and we all sort of reminisced about how we were getting beaten up quite a bit, but it is becoming the big key component moving forward is getting that infrastructure ready for charging. Really interesting policy drivers in the US. So they have the Inflation Reductions Act that helps move targets forward. Most recently, they have the unfortunate acronym ACT again, but there's ACT and ACF, which is Advanced Clean Fleets Rule, which now actually mandates not only vehicle manufacturers with zero emission vehicle sales targets, but also fleet operators. And if any of you have looked at what's happening with our government right now, there is a consultation paper going out with the same sort of strategies for discussion, right? Do we start to influence not only vehicle sales, but the operation of trucks in the province as well? Commercial truck charging hubs. So, a year or so ago, if anybody's familiar with Portland Electric Island, that was a partnership with Portland General Electric and Daimler Freightliner, who happens to be, right there in Portland is their main manufacturing and head office site. They built a modular truck charging hub, probably one of the first ones in the US. I think it was the first one in the US. And they did a lot of test beds there. It's quite an interesting site. Now there's lots of private entities now entering this space. So there's companies called like Watt EV that are now putting together full-scale commercial truck charging hubs. in some of the key states in the US. There's another partnership with Daimler and a few others called Green Lane Technologies that's doing the same thing. So we're seeing that happen in the US. Where we are here in BC is we're part of the consortiums that are looking at that on the West Coast corridors. We are working with some of those teams. We do have really good relationships with some of the manufacturers to have those conversations, but we're not quite there yet, right? We do need to do a lot more planning and strategy to figure out where commercial truck charging hub makes sense and what that technology looks like in terms of charging configuration and power levels. Oops. So the next thing I'd mention is shortly after I came back, I think this was sometime in early June or maybe late May, the ICCT, I think that's the International Council for Clean Transportation, published a report on the potential for battery electric commercial truck zero emission vehicle technologies and the market growth. Some pretty interesting findings out there. They are seeing that they're going to start to see really attractive total cost of ownership in some of the key driving states by 2030. And then they expect to see 1.1 million zero emission vehicle trucks and buses deployed in the US by that target date. Another really interesting comment, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but they don't think hydrogen fuel cells in the commercial trucking sector are going to be a big player. They feel that this whole segment will be largely dominated by battery electric, simply because of the plans for growth on infrastructure and the improvements in battery technology and efficiencies. So we'll see where that goes. Definitely some of the key areas, and this is something that we're definitely considering in our space too, some of the freight zones. So ports, industrial zones, freight corridors. We do have a really good working relationships with Vancouver Fraser Port Authority and Prince Rupert Port Authority and those types of customers. And so looking at those types of opportunities and supporting electrification in those corridors. And the other thing I'll mention is the maximizing use of existing grid capacity is key. This really strikes home with us at BC Hydro. So how can we potentially avoid having to bring in new service and new power? Can we help customers shape their load? Can we influence, different strategies for time of use and charging in off-peak hours to try to maximize the grid capacity without having to bring in, additional capacity? And so that was a key theme of the report as well. And some of these utility opportunities that were identified in the conference, but things that we've been really speaking to our customers about as well is really important for early engagement. The better we are prepared to have conversations with customers, the earlier we can see what that horizon looks like, the better we can help them with their design connection applications, the better, our team and Mike's team can better inform our planning group to look at where we're going to see some hotspots for load growth. So these are all key things that we keep communicating with customers. Again, I said maximizing existing capacity, looking at potentially phased infrastructure projects. Can we help customers get going in their fleet electrification projects early by helping to shape their load and find ways to, manage their charging, and then parallel, maybe building a bigger deployment as they start to phase in their fleet electrification projects. Definitely a key theme is a high level of preliminary support for utilities and advisory services. And I'm kind of pleased to say that we've done a fairly good job of that with our program offer, which I'll just get into in the next couple of slides. Improved design processes and efficiencies are definitely a key thing that we need to consider in our electrification plan. And then, other technologies are kind of coming up and bubbling to the surface now. So vehicle to grid, and what do those opportunities look like? And then where do we fit with truck charging hubs and which partners are the right ones to help move forward with those types of deployments? So I'm going to run through this pretty quickly, but I thought it would be a good context to talk about our fleet electrification program. Like I said, it's just a year old now. And we originally launched this program to support customers with the conversion of medium and heavy duty fleet vehicles to battery electric. I will say, in recent weeks, we've actually decided to open up that a little bit. So we're really trying to be less restrictive in terms of the type of fleet vehicle. We're open to light duty all the way through to heavy duty. We are seeing most of the support though required through the medium and heavy duty simply because the costs are bigger and the infrastructure projects tend to be bigger. And so, we don't I did have a slide here about our eligibility, but we're really tuning that down. Basically, we're really open to working with any type of fleet, with any type of customer segment, and just trying to help move them forward on their fleet projects. So there's 3 funding offers. One's an EV ready fleet plan. This is really effectively a fleet electrification roadmap. We fund up to $15,000 of consulting costs to do that study. And then the second one is what really customers told us was the biggest barrier to fleet electrification projects, and that's the hard cost of putting in new electrical infrastructure to support their fleet chargers. So we have an infrastructure funding incentive that we provide against those costs. And then the third one is basically pilot projects. That's a nice way to say it. Technology assessment funding, but it's really a pilot project, any sort of early stage opportunity that customers looking at. So I'll just go over those 3 offers a little bit more detail. The fleet plan, I'm pretty pleased to say that I think this is really helpful for customers. You know, if you're thinking about a fleet operator that's got to run their business every day and is dealing with all the types of logistics and things that they have to manage and resources and operators and everything else, what we heard from customers that I don't have the time to figure this stuff out. I really need help from the utility. And so our program is designed for them to go find a consultant, and we have pretty good consultants in this space that are doing this, to run through their existing fleet inventory and look at all the annual data, and then figure out which of those vehicles could potentially be electrified based on their duty cycles, based on their use case and applications, and when that could happen. So the consultant will work with the customer to get all that key data. And then once they've determined which vehicles they could potentially electrify in their fleet, they can go derive a charging plan. Now I know, how many chargers I need at what facility, what power level they need to be to support those vehicles, duty cycles on a daily basis, and what that looks like from an overall charging plan. And then our roadmap or our EV ready fleet plan then asks for the consultant to do a capacity assessment. So what does that mean in terms of my existing electrical service? Do I need an upgrade or not? And what are the costs associated with that? And so for the most part, I think a lot of our customers have been quite pleased with this whole process. It really does give them all the visibility on what makes sense to electrify in their fleet. It gives them the total cost of ownership. It does all the financials for them. And then they have a higher degree of confidence of what they could potentially electrify in their fleet. Like I said, we do fund up to a maximum of $15,000 for fleets that are over 150 vehicles. 50% of the study consults the cost up to a maximum of $15,000. And then for smaller fleets, we do a maximum of $10,000. I will say we're probably going to look at removing those thresholds and maybe just landing on one sort of funding amount, but we'll see where we go. The next offer, like I mentioned, this was the key barrier that customers identified. This is the cost of infrastructure. There's a pretty simple way to explain this funding program. We're going to help fund up to 50% of electrical infrastructure costs, including if a customer needs new BC Hydro connection services. For everything required to bring in that electrical service, design work, conduit, civil work, whatever it is, all the associated conductor and hardware, for everything but the charger. So we're not here to provide rebates against fleet EV chargers. There's other programs in the province that do that. So we're really here trying to offset the costs of that electrical system upgrade. Customers have 2 paths to go to this funding. Ideally, they're completing an EV ready fleet plan because then we have all the costing. They know what their charging plan looks like. But if the customer is well educated in this space, they've come up with a plan already, they know their fleet numbers very well, they can advance directly to this infrastructure funding application and do that directly as well. Pilot projects, pretty simple. Any type of customer identified opportunity for short-term temporary testing. Really, we're very open book about this. We're entertaining any kind of idea that a customer wants to advance. So one of the ones we had a while ago was a truck operator had an opportunity to borrow a pre-production unit in collaboration with the vehicle manufacturer. They ran that truck back and forth on a known route to test it out. We helped fund a temporary charger at a location to do that testing. And then everything buttoned up and went away. So the truck manufacturer got really valuable performance data, so did we, in terms of the charging and what that looks like. And then the operator themselves got some familiarity with the technology and how is with their user experience. So pretty valuable exercise. So that's just one example, but lots of opportunities for pilot projects. We're open to anything that a customer would suggest. So a couple of project examples here. I can't necessarily name names yet, until we get moving forward. But here's some good representative customers. So the first is Fraser Valley, large trucking operator. I think they've got well upwards of 300 trucks in their fleet. They are non-CAM, so that means they're not key account managed. They're a customer that was introduced to me directly. Not typically a BC Hydro key account customer because they didn't really have a big electrical footprint. But guess what? Now they're looking at electrifying a substantial portion of their fleet. So, it makes sense for us to really work intimately with them. They do everything from regional, local delivery haul to longer haul transportation corridors. And they really were focusing on what they could do for some of the shorter haul stuff that they operate out of the Fraser Valley operation. So basically they have some routes that they call city routes. They run back and forth to, let's say, Delta or Burnaby, back to their depot, and they do that all day long, right? So the short distances, multiple travel routes during the day, maybe a daily duty cycle of 300 to 400 kilometers. And then a really nice opportunity here to do overnight charging for those trucks. They worked with us to do an EV ready fleet plan. And that was really successful exercise with their consultant. And now we've provided them with an infrastructure incentive offer against the cost to put in potentially a phase plan for 20 Class 8 battery electric tractor trailer trucks. They saw really great payback on that city fleet. If you factor in things like low carbon fuel credits and the economics of fuel, they saw a good payback, well in the 4 to 5 year period. On some of those fleet routes. So that's really attractive. We haven't moved forward yet. And, we're still working through the finer details. So hopefully that project gets launched in short order. But we're really hopeful that it's going to be a really flagship project for our program. The next is a large retail key account. So they are a key account managed customer. They have a depot in Delta that does customer deliveries. They're working with Lion Electric. So that's the Class 6 box truck for deliveries of retail products. And they came to us, said, we don't need a study. We know what we need. We've done all the, logistics already. We do this stuff every day. And they worked with the vehicle manufacturer to provide an incentive offer application direct to our infrastructure incentive. And so right now they're going to be looking at 6 Class Box 6 trucks out of their depot in Delta. With a potential, future expansion to 12, and they have actually signed the infrastructure incentive agreement. So that's good news. We do have a project moving forward with them, and when time comes, we can hopefully share a bit more details on that. I won't spend too much time on this. Just to say, you can see here that across diversity of our fleet customers that we're working with, it's open to everybody. We do have a lot of local governments simply because they've got climate policies and goals that they're trying to strive towards. And so lots of them have done really good studies and are starting to move forward with fleet electrification. Transportation logistics customers like that one in Fraser Valley I mentioned. Lots of school districts. School buses are, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, school buses are everywhere now. So we're seeing a lot of school districts move forward with fleet electrification projects. And then a nice mix of industrial customers, post-secondary education institutions, airports, retail, ports, and it's growing from there. Typical fleet sizes are in the, A76 to 90 light duty. I think we're seeing anywhere from a fleet size of 5 or 2 all the way up to a few thousand. So a pretty broad range of fleet. Infrastructure costs, so across the board, we're seeing pretty high infrastructure costs, $422,000 on average for charging at a facility depot for new electrical service. And based on the incentives we calculated so far, we're averaging about $180,000 per incentive. But they go for anywhere from a low 5 figures up to the 6-figure amounts. And then the last thing I'll talk about just quickly is our fleet electrification rates. So as a commercial entity under our medium general service or our large general service rates, customers have to pay a monthly demand fee, right? So on their peak power usage based on a 15-minute interval. Customers on their utility bills will pay a certain amount per kilowatt of their peak power usage or peak power demand on a monthly basis. I don't know if that $12.70 a kilowatt is still current. It might be higher than that. But you can see that, in the existing opportunities for fleet electrification projects, if you're sitting there charging a large bank of fleet vehicles overnight, those demand charges can be pretty heavy at $12.78 a kilowatt. And so our teams designed 2 rates to help relieve those demand charges for fleet operators. The first is an overnight rate. So between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., customers can opt into that rate and not pay any demand charge associated with fleet charging during that time frame. There is a slightly higher energy rate associated with this optional rate, but we do run calculations for customers, and it's pretty attractive in what they can save from demand charges. And the second one is a demand transition rate, same type of idea, but there's no demand charges at all throughout the entire operating day. This rate does, though, diminish over time. So fiscal 27, which I guess is our 2026, you can see here that the demand charges start to ramp back up to their normal state. At the same time, the energy rate kind of ramps back down to its normal state. And this rate will eventually go away. It's more meant to help customers with an opportunity to figure out how to manage their charging and balance everything so that they can look at the opportunities to avoid those demand charges when they're in full deployment. The overnight rate, though, however, has no shelf life. As far as I know, this is going to be persistent. We don't see any reason to change that. We've seen a number of customers start to really move forward to access that rate as well. I think that's all I had. So yeah, I guess we'll take a break or go for questions.
Yeah, I think that was great, Jason and Mike. That was terrific. Hey, I'll start off with the first question, and then I'll let Jim latch on to our questions in the chat. Do you guys drive EVs?
Yes.
Yes.
Good answer. I stood before the BC Utility Commission one time, and I asked that question, and I just got dumb looks. Sorry, unknowing looks. So you guys are, anyway. So
I have a Bolt.
Good.
Yeah.
I've faffed around enough here. Jim, you want to kick in?
Mike's already answered this within the chat, but for everybody, could you explain the units MVA and the relationship to megawatt and gigawatt hours per year?
So MVA, megavolt amp. I guess the difference is our integrated planning team use that, and if you look at a transformer, usually it's stamped with that, but basically it just includes power factor MVA, whereas megawatt is just the real power. So that's really there is slightly I could get an engineer to write a full detailed differentiation between them. I don't know anything else, Jason, on that.
Nope, that's exactly right. Yep.
Okay. For either one of you, could you go a little bit deeper into the goals and strategies for BC Hydro's deployment of level 2 chargers? Why not just concentrate on DCFC?
So I guess level 2 is, I would call it a strategy that's in development right now. So there's going to be more consultation input in how that pans out. We're doing our first pilot projects, and then the government has updated the prescribed undertaking last month to basically request BC Hydro and Fortis to do level 2s at public sites, basically government-owned sites, parks, BC parks, support municipalities. I think it's potentially partly due to some of the municipalities wanting to see more charging, but not having the bandwidth or the funding themselves to do that, or not wanting to do that. So there's further consultation that's going to occur on how we do that. But I think in the interim, it'll be level 2 is adjacent to some of our fast charging sites, and then some of these deployment trials of a variety of different configurations and setups, and we'll do some more consultation to see where we go. So that target that was in the deployment plan is really just from a financial standpoint for rate design purposes, to think through the capital and operating costs over 10 years to come up with a rate. But the actual target in L2s will be worked through with further consultation.
Okay. We at VicEVA are getting a lot of questions from private charge suppliers. Usually the guys that are moving into gas stations, that not setting up, multiple charge points across the province. And they're looking for input from us on charging rates. And what I'm calling Uber style features for popular locations, as in when it gets busy, can you charge more? And this may be all customer related, but is that something that Hydro is considering as well?
So I guess, yeah, the rates which I showed a few minutes ago are what we're thinking of. But in terms of private entities, it's all the other entities except for BC Hydro and Fortis. They can do whatever they want in terms of pricing. There's no restriction, other than the interim state of the Measurement Canada for kilowatt hours. But from a pricing strategy, any entity can do what they feel is the best for their business purposes. So I guess, yeah, it's entities need to decide what they want to do, what their strategy is, what their business model is, what they're offering, and decide what they want to price that at.
Okay.
So it's completely open.
And related to that, we've got a question here from Lawrence, who's out of California, so he's used to a different charging structure. Where are we at with this interim Measurement Canada thing? Do you know?
So yeah, Measurement Canada has done the dispensation framework for level 2 in DC. Everybody's trying to figure out how to work within that framework to do their dispensation right now. But basically the difference in the US is that different states have had different rules. In Canada, it's federal for our measurement legislation. And so we're one of the few jurisdictions that haven't allowed public charging being billed by kilowatt hour because of the how the act was set up. But that is in progress to open up when entities file for dispensation. And there's slightly different rules for level 2 in DC. And then it's really a transition period where in the coming years, the accuracy required will go up, so that legacy chargers will basically be exempt in some cases from a certain level of accuracy. But from a utility perspective, utility meter as an example, for decades and decades and decades, we have always measured at 99% accuracy, and the EV charging space wasn't in that at that level, or hasn't been in that level, and so they got to get up to that level if those embedded meters are used to bill by kilowatt hour. So that's really, it's a bit of a journey to raise the bar across the industry.
Okay. Glenn, that's all I got in the chat.
Hey, I got a couple here. So the level 2 partnerships you guys just been told to get out and do, is that anything to do with perhaps looking at doing partnerships with places like schools and churches and things like that to take care of garage orphans in MERB buildings, things like that?
I guess it's not specific to that, but there is a generalized need in high density multi-unit residential areas, especially older buildings where it might be costly or unaffordable to put charging in the building. that essentially community charging of some sort is required, whether it's curbside or in a local parking lot. So it's not specific to the organization, although the regulation does call out any government-owned site, whether municipal, federal, provincial, park, Crown Corporation, as you know, as the area to focus on. But other than that, it's not prescriptive into that level of detail. So it's some more consultation is required to figure out exactly what that means and what is the best approach to move forward.
Okay. The recent addition of both Ford and GM to the North American Charging Standard, now that essentially makes that standard no longer proprietary, and it's probably too it is too early for you guys to comment authoritatively on it, but it seems obvious that would be that going forward you want to have the NACS start rolling out in the BC Hydro network.
We have asked our hardware vendors when those connectors will be available. So we don't have the questions have been asked, the dates of when they're available to buy, like that. The whole industry is basically scrambling to figure out how to change their software on their chargers and acquire the connectors and get supply. So yes, across the board, I think lots of entities are asking that question, and will be, I think in the coming months, more clarity will be available when products are being updated to actually have that as an option or a retrofit option. I think there's two tracks where net new products might be a bit quicker than retrofit.
Yeah, and I don't expect an answer to this one, but I'll editorialize a bit. Tesla can crank out their DCFC for somewhere between 25 and 30% of other makers. So I mean, from a government point of view of making every buck go a lot further, it makes a lot of sense to get on board and have them provide those chargers and wrap it in whatever wrapping you want. Says BC Hydro on it, whatever, but that might make it a lot cheaper. Again, I don't expect an answer. I got two other ones here. So the optional time of use charging that you've gone forward and asked from the BC Utility Commission, it sounds pretty good. During peak hours with 4 to 9 o'clock, you're going to have 5 cents over the base rate for energy per kilowatt, and then from 2300 to I think 0600 or 0700, 5 cents less. The only thing not mentioned in there is what is the base rate? Will it still be, or is the recommendation to go forward with brain's not working right now, the step one, 9.5 cents roughly for power?
So the base out of that construct as filed is the current standard residential inclining block, which is the step one and the step two. So that base is just as is, and this is just an add-on option.
Good.
To
Well,
that,
that's
to that
good information.
standard. So that's basically just an add-on. People have a choice. If this is approved, they'll choose if they want this, check the box to add this to my rate, this add-on option, or not, and people can make that choice.
Okay, well that's important for everyone to know, and because that definitely makes it a little more certain as to what we're going to get charged. And I'm going to leave with one last one. When you participate in the social media and you get the either uninformed or the intentionally obtuse, for whatever reason, they like to say, oh, the grid will never handle it. You'll collapse the grid, and the grid operators are tearing their hair out. Sorry, that was a bad line. But what is BC Hydro worried about going forward and eventually, having, being able to have the full EV fleet in BC, which currently is about 3.2 million vehicles, so might be 5 million at some point, plus, hit all the heat pumps. that'll be coming in to replace gas and oil and all sort of things. Is BC Hydro really worried?
No, the integrated resource plan that was actually just recently updated is basically contemplating all that consumption. So it's really just to update the plans and as required. And there's lots of tools in the toolbox to manage that load. So overnight rates to push things overnight. There'll be demand response and grid edge batteries and a bunch of different things. So it's really just, there'll be more tools that will need to be employed to serve that load. So it's just an evolution that in technology, using of technology instead of running wires for everything. So it'll be a combination approach.
Right. Yeah. Avoid transmission where you don't need to do it, sort of thing. And I guess that would be something like, roughly speaking, 20% increase in gross capability of power over the next 20 years.
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but yeah, there's, buildings and transportation where we want to electrify as much as we can. So it'll be making sure the power is there, and then through transmission, through distribution, and managing that load. So in some cases, it just means spreading out the peak load to overnight rather than expanding a distribution line for only dinner hour. Maybe part of the approach is, well, EVs is a good example where a lot of those can be charged overnight. We can just, a good example is everybody cooks their turkey right now on Christmas Eve at the same time. And so we can handle that today. So if we want to cook 2 or 3 turkeys at once, we might have to spread that out to your EV load at 3 a.m. And so that's the system today already does that peak load, and we're just adding more load. We just kind of flatten it out in some cases.